The SEC tournament is going to be an absolute bloodbath. Can anyone make it out alive?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Happy Wednesday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. It's the only daily national college hoop show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Schade, and you're joining me at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for making us your first listener watch. Let me remind you, you can catch every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to the everydayers here with us. And let me also welcome in the Locked On College Basketball Discord folks. Great to be together. This episode's brought to you by TurboTax. Are you ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head on over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your tax expert. Joining me on the show is our guy, Leif Thulin. It's good to be back together. Leif was out watching some tennis last weekend, so we didn't have game night because that was going on. Andy and I's daughters had birthdays. It was a whole thing, but we're together midweek and we're celebrating because, y'all, yes, next week is what we all look forward to. But today through Sunday is going to be wall to wall full of phenomenal basketball. Buckle up, get your caffeine, get whatever you need, and let's get after this thing. Here's where Leif and I are headed today. We're going to preview the three power conference tournaments that tip off today, SEC, Big Ten, and Big East. We'll get you up to date on all the bubble action. We'll tell you tonight's tickets that are going to be punched. It's the last day of ticket punching until Saturday. But also want to let you know, in case you missed it, the 4 tickets that got punched last night. We now have 11 of our 31 automatic qualifiers. We had in the CAA, UNC Wilmington over. Man, I was hoping Delaware was going to pull that crazy thing out. 76-72 for the Seahawks. In the Horizon League, we had Robert Morris over Youngstown State, 89-78. And then we had a little bit of a surprise in the NEC where St. Francis, who was 8-8 in conference play over Central Connecticut, 46-43. Ooh, gross, yuck. Neither team hit 50, Leaf. That's like vintage Virginia playing vintage Virginia all over that. And then the nightcap in the West Coast Conference, Gonzaga. Finally, congrats, Andy Patton, getting a win over St. Mary's after 2 failed attempts earlier this year, 58-51. This was also an ugly second half where neither team scored more than 25. Leaf, I joked that St. Mary's offense was offensive, but I guess Gonzaga's wasn't that much better. Any takeaways from that game for you before we go into our SEC conversation?
I think it's a confidence boost for Gonzaga. I mean, they've dominated the WCC tournament 21 of the last 27. They've also dominated the WCC since Mark Few's been there. And St. Mary's had won the majority of their games recently. St. Mary's won the WCC title last year, both regular season and postseason. So they had a chance to do that 2 times in a row, which is very, very difficult to do. And Gonzaga's metrics still are top 10 in KenPom. But their record in games against teams that are good has been very poor, which is unlike Gonzaga. And so I think this gives them some confidence despite it being an ugly offensive performance, despite St. Mary's not particularly playing well either. I think building off of a win is big, and I think it may even move them up a seed line. I keep seeing them on the 8 or 9 line, and even if they'd lost, I think the top 10 resume versus metrics probably leads them to a 6 or a 7. I talked with Andy a little bit about that. So I think you're going to see a 6 or a 7 seed Gonzaga, and I think they'll feel more comfortable there than if they have to play Duke or Auburn in the second round.
I'm with you. It was funny. Obviously, they weren't going to be like 9 or worse, but Gonzaga right now is 9th at KenPom. Can you imagine if their NCAA tournament seed, not overall ranked seed, was lower than their KenPom? That would have been insane. I'm right with you, though. I think this is critical because it bumps them up to at least a 7 seed, which keeps you out of a second round matchup against a number 1 seed. And that is critically important. Would always rather, face a 2 than have to go up against the number 1. All right, Leif, let's get to the SEC. For those of you watching, I'm going to pull up the SEC tournament bracket while Leif and I talk about it. I accidentally just pulled up the Big East instead. There we go. Let's switch to the SEC. We're going to talk Big East here in a little bit. Leif, the big question for me before we get to the bracket conversation itself, Auburn, for a long time now, has looked to be the number 1 overall seed in the entire nation. Lost back-to-back games to wrap the regular season, both on the road, both at teams that are probably top two, a 1 or 2 seed at A&M, and then hosting Alabama. Leif, is Auburn's resume strong enough that regardless of what, like, let's say worst case scenario for them this week, they lose the quarterfinal matchup, their first game to Arkansas if they beat Ole Miss, or Ole Miss, and Duke wins the ACC tournament and Houston wins the Big 12 tournament. Is Auburn still number one overall? Can they survive that?
I think they could. I don't know if they necessarily would, but in terms of resume, Auburn has 9 more quad 1 wins than anyone in the 1 seed conversation. So there are teams that have more quad 1s than Duke or Houston, but they're not in the 1 seed conversation because they have more losses than those 2 teams. So I think that you could probably lose in the quarters. And if Duke wins, I think it becomes a discussion. Even if Houston wins, I don't think they can surpass Auburn. Auburn owns the head-to-head. And though that was considered a neutral site, that was in Houston. So I think that's difficult to overcome. Duke has a chance because they beat Auburn at Cameron Indoor Stadium. So I would still lean Auburn as the favorite if it was like a betting question, even in that circumstance. But that said, Auburn has a chance to add a quad 1 win by beating Ole Miss. Oh. And in their next game, they'd have another quad 1 win in all odds of playing a team like Texas A&M or Tennessee. So I think that they'll still be a 1. Now the question could be, did they peak too early? Maybe, because I think their November self was better than everyone else's. Mm-hmm. And maybe their December, maybe their January, and now some teams are catching up to them. But it doesn't mean they can't win. And I don't think the Texas A&M loss is all that rattling, because Texas A&M desperately needed one, and Auburn had just clinched. So Bingo. I think there's a little complacency. The Alabama one leaves me a little bit to be desired. Chad Baker-Mazara and all his antics, certainly something to monitor, as last year they lost to Yale, and it was honestly largely to do with his antics once again. And I think you probably still think Auburn as a top 2 contender, but there are holes to be poked in their armor, right? Like there's chinks to expose in their armor, and we didn't see that for much of the season.
Leif, you mentioned, and I want to go here first before we talk about who's going to emerge a winner. It's nearly impossible to take a bad loss in the SEC tournament. On a neutral floor, top 50 is quad 1. Literally every team in the SEC other than LSU and South Carolina is top 50. So, I know it's like, duh, when you think about it, but the most losses anyone else can take is 1 more loss before Selection Sunday. So literally for everyone not named Mississippi State or Arkansas, nobody can take anything worse than a quad 1 loss. That's not going to kill anyone's resume. So there's some solace in that for the SEC teams, and that's just something to be aware of. Even if Auburn loses 1 more time, it's going to, unless South Carolina somehow beats Arkansas and Ole Miss, Auburn literally can't take anything worse than a Q1. Yep. Leif, as we look at this thing, man, I said it off the top, this conference tournament is going to be an absolute bloodbath. Not only do we have 4 teams that could, in some kind of crazy world, be the legitimate Final Four. Like, winning the SEC tournament might be more difficult than winning the actual Final Four, depending on the makeup of both tournaments. How do you look at this thing and try to make sense of it?
Yeah, I think you got to look at teams with the motivation and those who have the path of least resistance is typically how I look at these. And I think there is truth to, you lose in the conference tournament, you feel better if you're one of the national championship. I talked about that with Purdue last year. I know they lost in the title game, but they had more
overtime, right? Wasn't it an overtime loss? Yeah.
Yeah, they lost to Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So the way I'd break it down is essentially, I think Auburn, they have a double bye. They have time, and they're coming off 2 losses. That leads to motivation that I don't know would have been there had they beaten Alabama and Texas A&M. So I look at Auburn as the front runner, not just because they're the 1 seed and not because they've lost recently, but there's motivation and there's things to clean up. And I think Bruce Pearl is very good at coaching game to game. Like, you've seen him have tournament success both in the SEC tournament and in the NCAA tournament. So I look at Auburn as the favorite. I think it'll be very interesting to see Texas A&M and Tennessee should that matchup occur, because those 2 teams are going to play very physically, and I think they could be more fatigued coming into the next game against Auburn. So that's why I think they have a path of least resistance. And I've been high on Florida for a long time, so I'd love to see Florida and Alabama get a rematch. Ooh. But I could easily see a Kentucky that's trying to improve their seed line, or even a Missouri who gave Florida trouble, causing trouble for those teams. But the interesting storyline to me is what 1 seed could be clinched. If Tennessee wins, do they get a 1? If Florida loses, let's say in the quarters or semis, and Alabama wins it, do they surpass Florida despite Florida beating Alabama at Alabama? So that's the part that I'm most excited about. I think Auburn's the clear favorite to me just because of motivation and path of, I think, least resistance early. Yes, Tennessee and Texas A&M are tough teams, but I think Auburn matches up well with them as opposed to
and they're going to beat up on each other.
Exactly. And so they hurt each other. Auburn, I think, gets through Ole Miss or Arkansas fairly routinely, but who knows? And then on the other side, I think Kentucky and Missouri are 2 teams that are very streaky and difficult to play. Kentucky can score a ton, but I don't think that ever troubles Alabama because they can score even more. Missouri did beat Florida, but I'd still lean Florida. I think the most intriguing part is if Alabama or Tennessee wins, who's the final 1 seed in the actual tournament. So that's what I'm most looking forward to.
I'm with you. I think the most intriguing part of the SEC tournament is the Florida, Tennessee, Bama of it all, fighting for that 4th 1 seed. And I'm really interested in that. Leif, before we move on from the SEC, just a couple wrap-up things. We do have several bubble teams in action today. Arkansas and South Carolina kick this thing off literally like 43 minutes from now as you and I record game 1. Arkansas feels like they're in a pretty safe space, but you don't want to mess around and get beat by South Carolina again like they did just a couple weeks ago. And then also similarly, Oklahoma and Georgia is at some level a double bubble thing. It's the 4th game of today. That'll be tonight. I think both of these teams feel pretty safe right now, but you do squirm a little bit if you're the loser thinking about potential bid thieves and other teams jumping you. But the one, Leaf, that I think is in the most dire situation in the SEC is Texas. They're the 2nd game of the day playing Vanderbilt. I feel like Vandy is in a good space. I think they've played their way into pretty safe NCAA tournament contention, but Texas cannot take a loss here. And Leaf, let me throw in with it a question we had from Michael Specs in the chat, who asks, is Rodney Terry going to survive? So Leaf, double Longhorn question here. Can Texas get this win? If so, are they in? If they lose, are they done, cooked? And is Rodney Terry going to be coaching the Longhorns in November of 2025?
Can Texas beat Vanderbilt? Absolutely. Yeah. I don't think Vanderbilt's that formidable in terms of what they have on a 1 through 10 on their roster, but they very much are cohesive, and I would lean towards them beating Texas because Texas is not cohesive, and they are not a great team as a unit. I don't think, even if they win that game and then lose to Texas A&M, I kind of think Texas is on the outside looking in, because they've lost to Georgia and Oklahoma in those games where they can improve their standing. They've lost both of them. And so they'd need to win that game. And then to feel comfortable, you need to beat Texas A&M, which they actually did already this season, despite a 20-point deficit. But I would say that they're out. And if they don't make the tournament, I don't think Rodney Terry is going to survive. I think he inherited a very good situation in terms of talent from Chris Beard when they made that Elite 8 run. You could make an argument that they should have been a Final Four team, and I think they should have. They were a better team than that Miami team and just folded late. But, you know, if Kevin Keats, who makes the Final Four run, and they were planning to fire him before that, and then now gets fired, I think Rodney Terry doesn't have too many legs to stand on about, hey, I made an Elite 8 with other teams' players, and now we've missed 2 tournaments. So I don't feel all that confident about Rodney Terry surviving.
I don't either. And funny enough, to your point, Michael asks also, is Beard staying at Ole Miss? That's going to be a conversation for another day, but is a great question and one that we are certainly going to need to get to. Leaf, no evaluation, one word. Give me your conference champion for the SEC, or conference tournament champion for the SEC.
I'll go Auburn. It's a little lame, but I'll go Auburn.
I'm going to go with the Florida Gators. I think specifically because they've got more to play for, trying to wrap up that 1 seed. Love what they're doing. All right, Leaf, we got to turn our attention to the Big Ten, the conference that I believe is the most wide open of the power conferences in terms of its conference tournament. Are you on the same page, or do you disagree with me? We're going to get to that conversation and more about the Big Ten in just a second. Right after I tell you about TurboTax. Look, taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. But now Texas is matching with the TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon. Expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert right now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. And you can see the guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Leif, we turn our attention now to the Big Ten. We're going to get this primed and ready. As you start talking, I'll pull up the bracket. But here's my question to kick this off. With all due respect to Michigan State, who, boy, what a come up from Sparty. Is this the tournament of the Power 5 conferences that feels the most wide open to you? I tend to believe it is, but I'm wondering if you feel the same.
I see that logic, but I would push back and say the SEC has 4 teams with the possibility of being 1 seeds. So by that logic, you got 4 teams, 2 teams on each side of the bracket that have everything to play for. And I know we talked about Auburn's motivation, but you have 4 teams that are playing for a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament, and they have every belief that they can win it because they're that good, that they can be a 1 seed. So I think when you have 4 teams that are that good, that makes it more wide open than a field of kind of mediocre pedestrian. I understand that that's part of the point.
Sure.
Of, there's a lot of teams that are okay in this. And of course, Michigan State's been playing very well, but they don't feel as top heavy. But I think the top heaviness, but the depth of the top heaviness makes the SEC more wide open, especially with the sleepers being Texas A&M, who's a measly 3 seed, right? Like they're a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament, maybe even a 2 if they were to go far. Missouri has been considered one of the dark horses for a while. Kentucky is one of the biggest brands in basketball, and they're getting healthier. I know Jackson Robinson's out, but Lamont Butler's back, and the last month have been a top 15 defense after being 83rd for the prior month. So I just think there's more teams that can win it from the SEC, but I understand the logic of the Big Ten having more wide open because you don't necessarily know as much as you know about those top teams.
All right, Leif, let me ask you this. You and I were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. Michigan State, I have just for not even really contemplated them as a 1 seed. I like after what they did this weekend and what they've been doing late season, I bumped them up to a 2 seed in my mind. I was like, man, that's way to go, Sparty. That's your ceiling. But just this morning, I thought, I need to look at Michigan State and see if there is a path to a 1 seed for them. Leif, lay out why they could get there, and ultimately if you think they will, if they win the Big Ten tournament and double sweep the Big Ten conference awards.
Yeah, so that's the integral part right there. If they win the conference tournament as well as outright winning the Big Ten, which is the second best conference in college basketball this year by depth at the very least. I mean, people could argue the Big 12, but I'd go Big Ten. So Michigan State then wins 1, 2, 3. They win 3 games. I just wanted to make sure I had that right. So they win 3 games, and they already have a record that is 26-5. So that puts them at 29-5, and that puts them on par with the top seed. So Duke, as we stand, is 28-3. Auburn 27-4. Houston 27-4. Florida 27-4. So
with
at least
quad 1 wins, that would be, by the way,
and that would add some quad 1 wins. But at least one of those SEC teams has to pick up a loss, if not both of them. Then you would have, if Tennessee and Alabama lose, that takes another 3 of those teams have to lose from the SEC, and potentially all 4. So that puts them on par with the wins and losses. Now, the other thing would be that if they win both of them, and they've been accumulating quad 1 win after quad 1 win, including road wins, which are like quad 1 tier A wins, because they've beaten Maryland on the road. They've beaten Michigan on the road. They've beaten Illinois on the road, and they've been on this torrid streak. I think there's a possibility. I still would think that Florida, having played in the SEC, accumulating all those quad 1A wins as well, would probably be ahead. Alabama, same thing. They've beaten a team like Houston on a neutral. So I think that they don't have the non-conference wins to move them above the SEC, who has so many quad 1 wins and quad 1A wins. But it's a discussion, and credit to Sparty.
Yeah, the fact that they've put themselves in a place where you and I are sitting here on Wednesday of conference tournament week Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 4 days before Selection Sunday, even having a conversation about it is such a credit to what they've done. Like Tom Izzo just recognizing Jace Richardson is our best player. Here's the keys to the team, make it purr, right? Like that alone shows what a good coach he always is. Leif, let's get to the bubble side of things for the Big Ten, and then we'll make predictions on the champion for this. Today, there's only one real bubble game going on for the Big Ten, and that's Ohio State, who in my mind is like right at the cut line, one side or the other of it, depending on what you look at right now. But they are in a very tenuous situation, and I tell you this, they cannot survive a loss to Iowa, who just won against Nebraska to wrap the regular season. Iowa has not had a good year, but here they sit, and if they beat Ohio State, I think the Buckeyes might be on the outside looking in. Where are you at on Coach Diebler's team?
I don't think they should make it unless they make a deep run in this, because they have very few wins that move the needle for me. And this is my own evaluation. Sure. But also, they have so many losses.
So many.
I don't think teams should make it that many losses unless they play in a conference like the SEC, where you play Florida, Auburn, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Alabama in a given 2-3 week period.
Right.
And so Oklahoma, I'm more forgiving to than Ohio State, because they've had all those big time teams give them those losses. And then they have wins against Michigan, Arizona, Louisville, Texas. I think you need to have big time wins to back up that many losses. So unless they beat Iowa and then make a little run beating Illinois, I don't necessarily think they deserve a spot. I'd rather give that spot to Drake, who's 27-4 and has beaten Vanderbilt. And I'm saying this, if Drake were to lose in their
Drake already wrapped it.
So the point was more.
You're saying like if they were an at-large,
if they were to have lost,
I'm tracking with you.
If Drake were to have lost to Bradley, then you lose a spot, and this is last year's point for Indiana State. Indiana State loses to Drake in the championship game, but their resume, no one wanted to play them, so they didn't have enough quad one opportunities. But I'd rather give it to a team that's 27-4 than a team that's 18-13.
Yeah, and for Ohio State, assuming they don't win the Big Ten tournament, they're going to have 15 losses, right? They've got 17 wins right now. Every game they win adds to that. Obviously, that's how math works. But let's assume that they beat Iowa today and lose to Illinois tomorrow. They would be 18-15 on the season. It's just like 15 losses. I'm with you. I have trouble seeing that happening. Not really much else bubbly for the Big Ten. Indiana has, I think, comfortably played themselves into things. I mean, it ain't close. If we get enough bid thieves, I think Indiana might be on the outside looking in. But I would say right now, they're probably sitting, second of the last four in, maybe heading to Dayton. But I think Indiana is in and could really serve themselves well tomorrow by knocking off Oregon in the second round of the Big Ten. Leif, are you with me on that? Like, Indiana feels pretty safe, yeah?
Yeah, I think they're pretty safe because they've gotten some marquee wins. They're the last team to hand a loss to Michigan State. They've played well. They could have beaten Oregon just a couple days ago in Eugene, and Jackson Shelstad hit a 37-footer.
Good grief, that was crazy. Yes.
But, I mean, I actually think that Michigan State has a more difficult side of the bracket than the bottom, to be honest.
Yeah.
I know there's more quality teams, you'd say, but Michigan State has struggled against Indiana in the zone that they threw in. I would still lean Sparty. And then you look to the bottom side, I think Maryland's the team I'd choose. But I don't necessarily love anyone's path. Like, Illinois is starting to play better. Purdue, I've been out on for a while, but they should beat Rutgers. Michigan, I've been low on for a long time, but they're tough for Purdue because they're huge. So I kind of think it'll be Maryland and Michigan State, but I wouldn't be surprised if Oregon or Indiana gets to Michigan State. Michigan State actually benefits from a little bit of rest, but that's not in Tom Izzo's nature.
All right, Leif, let's talk about how this thing actually plays out. I mean, it's crazy because we had three teams tied for fourth at 13-7. That's Wisconsin, Purdue, and UCLA. UCLA actually is the team that wins the tiebreaker and is sitting fourth, but by nature of not winning the tiebreaker, Wisconsin sitting at fifth, Purdue sixth. That means they only get single buys. UCLA benefits in a major way from winning that tiebreaker. But Leif, as you said, man, there are a lot of different teams that seem like they could emerge from this thing. Like, you could tell me Michigan State, you could tell me Maryland and Derek Queen, you could tell me Illinois finally getting healthy and doing stuff. Wisconsin struggle maybe a little bit, but maybe John Tanji goes on a heater. Who emerges from this thing as the champion leading into Sunday show?
You know what? I want to go with just Sparty because they're fun. They're feel-good story. I think their path is difficult. Like I said, I think Wisconsin, Indiana, and Oregon. UCLA would be tough too, but I think Wisconsin is a harder matchup because
I
they
do too.
score
I do
more
too.
adeptly. But I'm going to go with Sparty because I'm leaning into Tom Izzo. They did this in 2016 where they had Denzel Valentine at the head of the snake, and they made a run. They kind of did something similar with Cassius Winston in 2019. 2020 might have been the same story had COVID not interrupted the situation.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go with Sparty for fun. Like I said, I don't love their path compared to the bottom, but I'm going to go Michigan State over Maryland.
This is the one where I'm going to bring it from a little bit of a dark horse. Give me Illinois to win this thing. I think the way, they're finding themselves healthy again, that ceiling goes up. The question is, when you're led in scoring by 3 first-year college players in Yakachonis, in Will Riley, and in Tommy Ivisic, not Zvonimir, can these guys hold up now that we get into tournament play? That's a big question that we've got to answer, but I think they have the capability to do it. I would love to see them play Maryland. I think that'd be a super fun matchup there in the quarterfinal. So we'll keep our eyes on that. Leaf going Sparty. I'm going to Illinois. Going to be a lot of fun in the Big Ten tournament. But now we got to turn our attention to the Big East tournament, which is played where, Leaf? Where do we play the Big East tournament?
The Mecca of basketball.
What's that called?
Madison Square Garden.
Are there any teams that play home games there?
Occasionally 2 actually, but 1 for sure. Certain the Johnnies. UConn likes to sneak in there too, though.
And is Sparty? Are the Johnnies in this Big East conference? Is that a thing?
In it to win it, with the guy wearing a white suit.
So we got to figure this out. The Johnnies playing some home games in the Big East tournament. How's that going to look? We'll talk about it in just a second. Right after I tell you about our good friends at Factor. Look, are you looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Well, Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every single week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, and grab-and-go snacks. Oh, man, I'm a snacker, Leaf. I need that to keep you fueled all day long. I love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning because life is busy. March Madness is here. I got no time for meal planning. I need Factor. And without sacrificing taste, I love that. These meals, man, they are all packed with flavor. The convenience of Factor is unbeatable. No press, no mess, just great food in minutes. So eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/lockedoncollege50 off and use code lockedoncollege50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. Again, that's code lockedoncollege50 off at factormeals.com/lockedoncollege50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Okay, Mr. Thulin, we turn our attention to the Big East tournament. As we said, starting today, it'll be in Madison Square Garden. We got 3 matchups today for this 11-team conference, the first of which will be number 9 Butler against number 8 Providence. Then we'll go to number 10 DePaul against number 7 Georgetown, and number 11 Seton Hall against number 6 Villanova. We were joking about it leading into this segment, but legitimately, how big of a home court advantage is it for the number 1 seed in this tournament, the Johnnies, and this heater that they're on, to be playing games as you called the Mecca of college basketball in their, in a home arena here? How good is that for Rick Pitino's club?
I mean, it's huge, but the one thing is Big East fans are all at least closer than most other conferences. So I don't think it's as big an advantage as it would be to play some tournament. Let's say
Oregon, like the Big Ten tournament is in Eugene or something.
Yeah,
like that.
No, and it's if when the ACC was in Greensboro, Carolina, Duke, NC State, and Wake always were well represented. So there's 4, but there other teams had to travel a bit. At least New York is fairly centrally located to most of these teams. There's a couple that have to travel. So UConn always shows out well there as well. So I think it is a big advantage, but I don't know if they need much of an advantage. I think St. John's is tough to pick against, but I've realized I've picked all 1 seeds, and I don't necessarily feel good about myself right now. You know the team that I'm most interested in here?
Who's that? Tell me.
Xavier, because Xavier is on the bubble. I think they're on the right side of the bubble. They've won. I want to say they've lost 3 games in their last 15, maybe. I think they're 12 of their last 15. And if they beat Marquette, it's a quad 1 win. Though Marquette is spiraling, that's still a quad 1 win. And it's on a neutral. It's not a home game. So that looks really, really good. They punch their ticket for sure if they win that game. Now, if they win that game, why not do a little insurance? They play St. John's. They've played St. John's fairly closely.
Very.
So I think Xavier's the dark horse in this tournament, but obviously it's hard to pick against Marquette. And then on the bottom, UConn and Creighton have split the series, both teams winning on the opposing team's home court. But UConn has traditionally struggled with Creighton and the drop defense that Ryan Kalkbrenner employs. By the way, he won his 4th straight Big East Defensive Player of the Year.
It's crazy, man. It's absolutely crazy. Leif, as you look, for me, I think Xavier right now is last team in. I think they're in, but I think they are the last team in. And so, as you said, I think knocking off Marquette could be massive for them. I think they're the only bubble team in serious contention here in the Big East. I think Villanova they've kind of messed themselves up and aren't close enough. And then the other, I think St. John's, Marquette, Creighton, and UConn are all in, which is funny. Leif, tell me if you think I'm off on this. Big East is going to get more teams in the NCAA tournament this year than it did last. It had just 3 last year in Marquette, in UConn, and in they're going to get more this year, but I think the ceiling for the for the Big East, with Freudian slip there, I think the ceiling for the Big East is lower this year for sure than last year. Agree or disagree?
Agree, because last year all those teams made the Sweet 16, and one of them was one of the better basketball teams the last 20 years, and they won the national championship. So definitely agree there. I do think St. John's has potential to make a run, but yeah, I think you're going to get at least 4 teams and possibly 5 in.
Yeah. We talked about it with Michigan State. Like, is the path there for a 1 seed if they sweep regular season and conference tournament? I'll ask the same question about St. John's, but even before you answer, Leif, I just don't think there's enough resume stuff there for St. John's to even sniff a 1 seed should they go double on regular season and conference tournament. But I think a 2 is well within reach should they sweep. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's very hard to usurp the SEC teams that we have ranked 4, 5, and 6, meaning Florida, Tennessee, and Alabama, whichever way you want to spin those. And I think it's very difficult for Michigan State, but I think it's almost impossible for St. John's because they don't have the opportunities in conference play to make those wins matter as much. The funny thing is they easily could have won all the games they've lost. And we could be talking about a team that's got 1 or 2 losses because I think they're 4 games they've lost by combined 7 or 8 points.
That sounds right. I don't have it pulled up right now. Okay, coming up, here we go. Baylor by 1 in double OT, Georgia by 3, Creighton by 1, and Nova by 2. So
7
2,
points.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They are basically, what? Anyway, that's loosey-goosey math. But yeah, it's such a good point, Leif. There is a world where this St. John's team is in a pretty different place than they are right now. Leif, very quickly, I want to look at bubble games in the other power conference tournaments today. In the ACC, we've got North Carolina against Notre Dame. North Carolina is just simply needs to bide their time until they get a rematch with Duke. Should they lose today versus Notre Dame or tomorrow versus Wake Forest, their bubble chances are dashed, in my opinion. Yes?
Absolutely.
SMU, I think they're done. I think they're too far gone off the bubble.
They're terrible. They're terrible.
Yeah. No quad 1 wins for SMU. And I think Wake also similarly is too far gone to have really bubble hopes. Obviously, like at large hopes. Obviously, whoever wins the ACC is going to make it in. In the Big 12, Leif, let's look at this thing. As of today, we've got some teams trying to figure stuff out here, but I think West Virginia's pretty safe. We look at all that. I think Cincinnati's too far gone, and I feel like Baylor's safe, but you don't want to mess around here today if you're the Bears. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit there. What do you think?
I think they're probably safe because they're 10-10 in Big 12 play, and they have a few wins that look good, and their losses aren't horribly reprehensible for the most part. But
That phrase I've heard all day. They're not horribly reprehensible. That's great.
But this is not hindsight. You've heard me rant about this. Baylor's not very good.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they got top 25 nods for as long as they did, the fact that they're in the top 6 of people's seed lines and even top 3s while they were losing to random teams that aren't very good disturbed me. So I'm almost rooting against them. And I've traditionally liked Baylor. I think they probably make it, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're sent to Dayton.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, I mean, that is a very legitimate thing for that. By the way, as we record here, we are underway in Big 12 action. Iowa stayed up 7-2 on Cincinnati early. So Baylor, don't mess around later today. Got to take care of K-State, which did have that 6-game winning streak not that long ago.
K-State could easily beat Baylor.
I know. That's the thing. And if so, I don't know, Leaf. We're going to have to watch. So, Scott Drew, make stuff happen today. Also, Kansas, you probably shouldn't lose to UCF. You're not going to miss the tournament. You're not in trouble with that, but we need to see something from these Jayhawks getting moving. All right, Leaf, we got 4 more we're going to punch later on today. The Southland Conference, 5 Eastern on ESPN2. Number 2 seed Lamar against McNeese, the number 1 team. Will Wade be there next year? I think not. I think he's going to get a power conference job. McNeese had the biggest margin of victory in the regular season of any Division I conference by 5 games. Patriot League, number 2 American against number 5 Navy. That's 7 p.m. tonight Eastern on CBS Sports Network. And in the Big Sky, number 2 seed Montana against number 1 seed the other UNC, Northern Colorado, 11:30 Eastern on ESPN2. Get a nap in. And then I said 4, Leaf. We just got 3 tickets tonight. And then we've got a break. No tickets punched tomorrow or Friday. But then Saturday, man, we are putting 12 teams in the dance. Crazy stuff. So after tonight, we will have 14 of our 31. Leaf, it's going to be another great day of basketball. Buckle up. Let's get after it. Anything else from you before we get out of here today?
I mean, I just can't wait. This is my favorite 7 days of the year. It's the 4 days. It's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday of conference championship. Now you skip the next 3 days and you go, who cares about Monday through Wednesday? I like the first 4, but I only like it. But no, love it. And then you go the next 4 days. So give me my 8 favorite days of the year, the first 4 days of madness, and the last 4 days of conference tournament week. So I can't wait. We're done. I just got one more day to my favorite 8 days of the week, 8 days of the entire year.
Man, it's great. We need to change the Beatles song 8 days of the week to somehow talk about this. It would be really good. Gang, thank you so much for being with us. Make sure you are subscribed to Locked On College Basketball, both on YouTube and audio, so that you don't miss any of the great coverage of everything going on throughout the sport. We're getting close to portal season. It is 12 days away before the portal opens. It's later this year, not the day. It won't be this Monday like it has been the last couple years. If you've not joined the Locked On College Basketball Discord, you need to hop in there as well so you don't miss a second of that. Link is in the show notes. Absolutely free to join. As always, I want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Pope. Shouts to McBruins. We'll talk again tomorrow. Andy Patton will be your host. But until then, peace.